Hello and welcome to this brand new Blender Smoothie tutorial. My name is Ben Amond, and today we're going to be completing the pizza tutorial series. So, in this last part we're just going to be working on the shaders, essentially, because we've pretty much got the texturing done. You can see there's still a couple little areas kind of where I've got some pepperoni pieces intersecting a little bit with the rest of the mesh here, but can tweak those a little bit more later. So for now, all we're going to be doing is adding the shaders, the subsurface scattering, and all those other things. So let's get started with that. The first thing we're going to do is switch back to cycles, because we were in Blender just because it's a little easier and more convenient to preview the texturing in Blender Render. And I'm going to switch back to solid here for now, just so we don't have to worry about that. And I'm going to actually combine these two windows. Now, there actually is one more texture that we want to create really, really quickly. So, actually, let me bring this back, because we can go ahead and take care of that now. Basically, we're going to need something for the bump map and something for the specular map. And generally, these things are... the differences between them in the case of this pizza are subtle enough that we can actually use the same texture for this. And what I mean by this is, let me go ahead and open that pizza texture up again, is we can save this image as a different image. So first of all, I'll go ahead and open the pizza texture that we have right here. Open image, save as image, and we want to save this under a different name. We'll call it spec/bump map.png. And basically all we're going to do for this is we're going to switch this from view to paint so we can actually paint something on here. Press T to pull up the properties panel, and I'm just going to switch from clone to brush. So, because we're not cloning anything here, we're actually painting. And I'm going to turn off the pressure sensitivity things. We're not using a tablet or anything, and turn up the strength to 1. And I'm going to adjust the radius too. Basically all we want to do is paint white all around the center of the pizza like this. Now basically what this is going to do, this will also help, this won't be responsible for a bump mapping so much as it will be responsible for the mixing of the subsurface scattering and with everything else. We want there to be a lot more subsurface scattering for the top of the pizza than we do for the crust, just because the cheese is a little more the cheese is a little more translucent, and the effects of subsurface scattering are a little more visible in that. So basically, we just want to keep painting over all this until we got something sort of like that, and that should be good enough. Now, the reason we're not adding, black or gray to these other parts is we're just going to leave them the way they are, is because they are going to have a little bit of subsurface scattering in them when we mix it later on. So we don't want to change these to black, because then they won't have any. And this will make a little more sense when we kind of combine them in just a second here. So I'm going to... looks like it still has that. Alright, I'm going to save that as... yeah. Oh, okay. Apparently adding a slash in the image file name creates a new folder. Okay, we'll just save it as bump map then. That's the easiest thing to remember. So we'll keep that there. And that looks good enough. That'll work. It doesn't have to be anything super complex, so I'm just going to combine these, and I'm going to open this up. And we'll switch this to the node editor, so we can start working on some of the shaders here. And before we go any farther, let's add a light, because right now, if we were to go straight into rendered view, we would just see this, because we don't have any light source in here right now. So I'm just going to add a plane really quickly, and we'll move that all the way up there and kind of rotate it around. Let me turn on the screencast keys really quickly so you can see what I'm doing there. Right. And we'll just go ahead and quickly add a new shader to that. Come over here, kind of move these around. We'll just delete that. And we're going to add an emission shader, of course. It's the shader that emits light. And we'll bring that all the way up to white there. And this doesn't have to be a really nice lighting setup. We just want some light, in this case just a key light, so we can have a little more to work with than just the ambient lighting. Probably bring that up pretty high. Want it to be nice and bright, maybe even 100. That'll probably work. Okay. Okay, so let's get started on the main pizza mesh first, because then we can go back and add the pepperoni shaders after that. So I'm just going to, with the pizza selected, add a new shader, and we'll go ahead and we'll just name it pizza, just for simplicity's sake. Now, we do want to go ahead and we're actually going to keep this diffuse shader because we're going to be mixing a subsurface scattering shader with this diffuse shader. So, but of course, before we do anything else, we're going to have to bring in our image texture that we've been using. So press Shift-A to add, and go over Input, and maybe it's under, yeah, it's under Texture, add Image Texture. And we'll go ahead and connect those two. And we're just going to click on this image right here, and we're going to load it. That is not good. Is that the one we're looking for? Alright, no, it looks like it's saved over it. Should still be able to find it. I'm going to go ahead and open that up and go back to pizza textures in here. Yeah, and it's right there. Final pizza texture. Looks like it didn't keep that one in here, I guess probably because it didn't have a fixed user. But okay, so we can see that it's working, it's mapped properly. It doesn't look very appetizing, partially because the pepperoni's on there, and that's not textured yet. But we don't have any of the glossiness, any of the subsurface scattering, any of that right now. So we want to go ahead and take care of that first. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add that subsurface scattering node, and we're going to mix it with this diffuse shader. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Shift-A, add a shader, and we'll add this subsurface scattering one. And we're going to drop this image into the input for the color, of course. And I'm going to adjust the scale a little bit. Let me just kind of show you how this works. So I'm just going to connect that to there just so we can sort of see how this goes. So as you can see right now, it's really, hang on, let me turn up the sampling. Subsurface scattering is really noticeable, like it's really strong, and it's actually kind of dark because of that, because you lose a little bit of the lighting when you have that subsurface scattering in there. So actually, really quickly, I could probably just turn this up even a little more. I'm going to try like 150. Okay. Whoa, zoomed in a lot there. So the scale basically adjusts how much of that effect is visible to a certain extent. So if I were to lower this and bring it down to like 0.1, take a look at it, you'll see that it does look a bit more solid and a little less translucent. If I were to bump this up to 5, it gets a lot darker, it's a lot more noticeable. So that's not quite the effect we want. And its default value at 1 is still a little too high. We want to adjust that a little bit, not as low as 0.1 though. So we're going to start out with 0.5. And that's still probably a little too much, but we're kind of mixing this with the diffuse shader just because we're trying to get the right level of brightness and the right level of translucency and whatnot. So this will probably work pretty well. And the very first thing we want to do then is combine these, just so we can start to get sort of an idea of how they're going to work. Because again, it looks okay right up about where the cheese area is, but it looks kind of weird where the crust is. I don't know how well you can see it in the kind of small viewport here, but we do want to adjust that a bit. So I'm just going to go up here to the node editor. First, I'm actually going to leave the view there. I might want to switch to, let's see here, where I find that. It was under, no, it wasn't under there. Am I already using? It might be. I'm going to take a quick look at that. Oh yeah, I am using the CPU. Okay. And in this case, I am going to be using the CPU. I can't remember if subsurface scattering is supported yet for the video card or not, but a display driver might crash either way, so it's safer this way. And I'm just going to combine these like this. And we're going to use that image we created as the factor, the mixing factor. So I'm going to duplicate this image input node, and I'm going to make that a single user. I don't know if that's actually necessary, but just in case. And it looks like it's not there, the image we just created, so I'm going to go ahead and reload it. This right here. And I'm going to drop that into the factor. So now if we take a look at this, again, the effect isn't super noticeable, but it is there. The subsurface scattering is being applied to the cheese a lot more than it is to the crust. And that's what we wanted. Because again, the cheese is a little more translucent and the crust is a little more solid. So we don't want those having the exact same properties. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to kind of leave that view again. We want to add a little shininess to this, a little glossiness, and I just realized that the reason I wasn't seeing anything there is this wasn't connected. So let's take a look at that again. Alright, now it's a little more noticeable. Yeah. So, like I was saying, we want to add a little bit more glossiness to this, because it's a pizza. It has cheese and pepperoni on it, and it's probably going to look a little greasy. I'd be surprised if it didn't. So we want to add a little glossiness to this. And to do that, we are going to add a glossy shader. We're probably going to be using this same image texture as the factor to combine it, just because we want a little more shininess on the cheese and stuff on top than we do on the crust, just like we did with the subsurface scattering. So I'm going to add a new shader, a glossy shader, and I'm going to bring that brightness all the way up to white, just so we don't have to worry about tweaking that. And again, the roughness value here, the higher this value is, and the more blurred out the reflections are, the more diffused they are. And the lower this value is, and the sharper and clearer they are. So we want to actually move that up a little bit to maybe 0.3. And then I'm going to add another mix shader here. We'll combine those. And we're going to use this image texture as the factor again. Okay, so let's go ahead and render that and see how that looks. Alright, that's obviously way too much. I mean, we can see this cheese in the center is pretty much a perfect mirror. It's not very clear, and remember, this is because we're using this image texture and we painted the center completely white, which is why there's absolutely none of the remaining texture in there. So to remedy this, we're just going to basically duplicate this mix node, move it up here, and I'm going to kind of leave this view here again so we can speed things up a bit more. And we're basically going to combine this mix shader, we're going to connect that to the first input on here, and this glossy shader, sorry, not this glossy shader, we want to connect this to the second input there, and we want to connect this mix shader to the first input there. So basically what we're doing is mixing the glossy shader mixed with the rest of this, and the rest of the shader minus the glossy shader. So basically we're kind of negating the glossiness by doing this. And if we go into rendered view, we can see it's already taken a little bit of effect. It's not a perfect mirror in the center there anymore. It still looks really weird though, so we want a really, really low value for this. So to take care of that, we're just going to lower this value to something really low, like 0.05. Maybe even a tiny bit lower than that, 0.045 perhaps. Yeah, so something like that. And we can see there's still a little bit of shininess in the crust out here. That's okay, because we would expect a little bit of that grease to get on there. And it looks pretty good. That'll probably work. A really thing that really sells it is, of course, the pepperoni shader, which we're going to be working on very shortly here. One other thing I want to do, though, is I want to add some bump mapping really quickly. So to do that, I'm just going to, I think we'll probably use this image texture right here. So I'm just going to add a math node, and I'm going to connect that to the displacement input right there, and we'll change this to multiply. And we'll start with that. I'm going to drag that in there and see how that looks. That looks really bad. Maybe first of all, we might want to flip that to negative 0.5 to give it that, yeah, that's a little better. And then maybe make it a lot lower, like negative 0.05. Maybe. I think we might actually, let's go ahead and disconnect this. We might actually use this one right here, just because the cheese up here on the top of the pizza is going to be a little flatter, and we want to be able to add a lot of bump mapping to this stuff on the outside. So I'm going to actually increase that to like negative 0.35. Let's see how that looks. Alright, so you can see we're getting, it's still too much. Yeah, it's still a little more than I might want. Yeah, let's go ahead and make that a little lower, like negative 0.2, something like that. And yeah, that'll probably work, because you can see we've got some bump mapping on the outside here, where the cheese is sort of going over the crust, and that's what we want. It's where we want it to be the strongest, at least. So, as far as our main pizza shader goes, that looks pretty good, and that's probably all we're going to be doing on this for now. So now we can move on to the pepperoni. So I'm going to move back to solid view there. I'm just going to select this. And of course, we already have the UV mapping and everything set up, so this is a pretty simple shader to make. We'll just go ahead and add a new one. And I'm going to name it Pepperoni. Ooh, Pepperoni. And we're going to do sort of the same thing we did with the pizza, where we're going to kind of mix the diffuse with the subsurface scattering. Let's see how that looks. We might not even need that diffuse node. It might be okay to just use the subsurface scattering node. And I'm just going to add an input, an image texture input, and use it for both of those. We're going to kind of see how that looks for that piece of pepperoni. Oh, yeah, we have to actually load it, of course. That would help. There we go. Okay. And let's, maybe we can isolate this. So let me just, gonna select this, and I'm just gonna duplicate it and move it to another layer, that second layer right there. And I'm gonna move this over to there too, just so we still have a light source in this layer when we look over here. I'm gonna go into rendered view and kind of take a look at this. Maybe see if I can get a bit of a better idea how it's supposed to look. Let's try turning that all the way up to 1 to see. Okay, so that's what strictly subsurface scattering looks like. And maybe we can kind of tweak this a little bit more too. Pepperoni's thinner. I think we should keep that value the same and probably just make the mix value about 0.5. And that'll probably work. That looks pretty good for subsurface scattering. It's kind of hard to get it to look right on the pepperoni anyway because it's so thin that most of it's already included in the image texture. And we're going to add some grease to this too. So I'm just going to add a mix shader there, and we'll combine that with a glossy shader. Alright, and we'll bring this all the way up to there. And we're going to lower that mix value to like 0.04 or something maybe. Let's get a bit of bump mapping too, so we can sort of see it a little better. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the previous pizza shader and add a math node. Connect that value to the displacement input. And we'll drag this image over to there and change this to multiply. Alright, and we'll start kind of tweaking these values a bit. Maybe 0.05 would work. Alright. Not really getting much specularity on this. Maybe we can kind of increase that to like 0.1. Gotta find the right angle too, because there are... Oh, it looks like we're getting there with that. I'm actually gonna increase the roughness too, to kind of diffuse that a little bit more. Maybe not quite that much. We'll try 0.25. That'll probably work. It looks a little metallic on here, which means we probably need to adjust the subsurface scattering and the bump mapping a little more. I'm going to turn that down to 0.025 maybe. And maybe we'll lessen. I want to see how that looks. Yeah, maybe 0.225. See how that works. And I'm going to add a little more subsurface scattering into the mix here too. But maybe lower that scale a bit to make it a little brighter. Would probably help. Okay. And that's pretty good for the pepperoni shader. It looks a lot better here if we kind of move it back to that first layer. Oh, whoops. I think I had the light selected still. So we'll probably have too much light in this. Maybe. Did I? No, I didn't. Okay. Yeah, let's keep that there. Alright. So yeah, if we go into rendered view and kind of take a look at this, it looks pretty good. Yeah, so at this point we can just copy this to all the other ones. And there's a really quick and easy way to do that, and that's just to select all the pepperoni pieces, so just right-click them, shift right-click, shift right-click. This isn't showing up in the screencast keys for some reason. But we'll go ahead and copy all those, or select all those, and then finally select, as your last selection, the piece of pepperoni with the shader that's already applied. And we can press Control-L, that's the link, as you can see, Make Links menu, and choose Materials. And as you can see now, it has linked that pepperoni shader to all these other pieces of pepperoni. And if we go ahead and render it, it looks pretty good. So the pepperoni shader is working pretty nicely on there. Now, of course, as well as the shaders, how appetizing this looks also depends on the lighting, which in our case isn't that great. It's just a single key lamp up there. Now I might want to see if I can kind of increase the brightness of these a little more. So I'm going to kind of lower that scale a bit more, maybe 0.4. That's a little better. Okay. So there's one other thing I want to do really quickly. And that's basically whenever a pizza is cooked, sometimes sort of this grease from the pepperoni kind of pools under it. So I want to add a little bit of that grease surrounding the pieces of pepperoni, because that makes it look a lot more believable and a lot more edible. So basically all we're going to do is I'm going to combine these because we don't need that anymore. Is I'm just going to select this pizza and go into textured view. And we're going to split our view here again and switch to the UV image editor. I'm going to open the final pizza texture. Oh, you know what? Actually, what displays the visibility of these, I think, is which one is selected. Yep, there we go. Okay, so no need to worry about that. And basically, what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be painting with a little bit of kind of a reddish color around these pieces of pepperoni. So, if I can go ahead and start with this first one here, we're just going to go into texture paint mode. And basically, we can just sort of grab maybe a kind of a color from the pepperoni, maybe not that dark, maybe a little more like that. Lower the radius a bit, and basically just paint a little bit around there. We don't want the strength all the way at 1 though, so maybe 0.65. And just kind of paint very slightly. It doesn't have to be very visible. Just something like that. You know, it doesn't look... Maybe we can kind of add a couple varying areas of darkness and brightness and whatnot as we sort of go around with that. So yeah, that's basically all we're doing is we're going to each of these little pieces of pepperoni and just kind of painting around them like this. Just a little bit. And like I said, this makes it look a lot more believable. It actually integrates the pepperoni a little more with the pizza itself. As you can see, it already looks a lot more like the pepperoni is actually a part of the pizza, like it was actually cooked with the pizza. And so we just want to do this around all these pieces of pepperoni. And again, it's basically there you see these kind of rings surrounding the pepperoni where like the center isn't painted in, and don't worry about that, of course, because these pieces of pepperoni are kind of covering them up. And to add a little more detail, if you want, you can kind of, like I've been doing, kind of paint over some of the areas again after you've already painted them, and it gives a little varying degree of brightness in there, because you want a little bit of variety, just to sort of mix it up a bit so it doesn't look totally uniform. And we're just about done with these. I didn't add very many pieces of pepperoni. It's kind of a small pizza too, it looks like. And just 3 more pieces. So this is really the final touch of the pizza. It makes it look a lot more believable. You want to be a little careful though, because you don't want to paint too far out from the pepperoni. Otherwise it looks like it's been, painted. If you do paint a little farther out on the pepperoni, then kind of color those in with a little more variation. Just so that it doesn't look as artificial. And this is the last one. Just about done with it. Alright, and that's pretty good. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and save this image before we go any farther, just to make sure that saves properly. Okay, and you can see it already looks a lot different. The pepperoni looks like it's actually supposed to be a part of the pizza. So if I go back to object mode here, maybe take a look at it in rendered view too. Takes a while because I'm using the CPU, but you can sort of start to see it coming in there. Maybe we can increase the brightness of this light a little bit more just so we can get a bit of a better look at it. Maybe up to 200. And I'm going to save this too, just in case it decides to crash on me. Alright. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So the bump mapping still looks a little off. Something that I might do to kind of help with that, because it looks a little weird, a little sharp, is I go in and I blur parts of that image texture that we used for the bump mapping. And of course it's not going to affect the subsurface scattering or anything, because that area that we painted was already pretty blurred. But if we sort of can't really see it from there, but around the edges here it is a little sharp, a little crisp. And we might want to edit that a little bit. So yeah, just adding a little bit of blurriness to that bump mapping image will help a lot with that and kind of smooth it out, make it look a little more believable. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So there you have it. It's how to create a pizza in Blender. I hope you learned something from this tutorial series, and I'd love to see what you came up with. Thanks for watching.